All right, welcome everybody. So today we're back with Sir Anthony Buzzard. This is his website. This is his fellowship, Restoration Fellowship. You can contact Anthony, by the way. This is his email, anthonybuzzard@mindspring.com. And today, welcome back Peter Karavas, a Friends of Jehovah's Witnesses, a fear-free zone. So today, Peter and Anthony, we're going to focus on what's known as eschatology, end of days. So Matthew 24, a prophecy, it's known as a prophecy, and we're going to focus on the question in verse 3, when the disciples asked Jesus, tell us, when will this happen? And they're talking about the destruction of the temple. What will be the sign of your coming, or parousia, end of the age? Okay, Peter, so if you want to take it away, it's all yours.
I'm guessing Anthony's going to agree with me that parousia is not really a debatable issue. It just means presence. Maybe I'm wrong, but
we'll have to see about that.
We'll
So I'll give you the floor for now, Peter.
It seems hard to overcome that parousia means presence. Let's see. When we look at, Vine's Expository Dictionary, it says denotes both an arrival and consequent presence with. Then in Rotherham's appendix, the Emphasized Bible, Rotherham, which was a very technically accurate translation, page 271, he says, the word parousia is uniformly rendered presence, coming as a representative of this word being set aside. So he's setting aside the word coming. It means presence. The sense of presence is so plainly shown by the contrast with absence in 2 Corinthians 10:10. Let's see, I don't have that up, but I do have Philippians 2:12. Wherefore, my beloved, as ye have also obeyed me, not in my presence only, but also my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So the contrast between the word absence and presence makes it pretty clear. There's a separate word for coming. That's a different word that's used in the Bible. And so parousia denotes presence. So let's see. You wanted me to cover parousia, right? Matthew 24, all that.
Sorry, Peter. Yes, basically, how do you teach parousia? In other words, when it comes to Jesus, his advent, or what's popular known as his second coming. So when did this take place, or he's going to take place, and so on?
Right. Well, an issue that Anthony and I would disagree with is I believe that Jesus is an invisible spirit being. From my perspective, when he returns, since he's invisible, no one's going to be able to see him unless he purposely makes himself visible. I think there's a series of scriptures that show that when Jesus comes, that he comes in manner that's unapparent to the world. That his parousia is broken down into two parts, the epiphania, or bright shining, when it's compared to the sun rising from the east and shining even to the west. It's a gradual sun rising, and it's usually mistranslated lightning, but lightning doesn't shine from the east to the west. The sun does. So Jesus' presence is like the dawning of a new day. When you wake up in the morning and the sun's just beginning to come over the horizon, it's going to be dark outside. So, in 10 minutes, there's not much time to go through all these scriptures. The days of Noah are of his presence in Luke and Matthew, of his parousia, Noah's parousia, is compared to the days of Jesus' parousia, and it says they knew not till the flood came. So when the Armageddon flood comes, and in Luke 17, that's referred to as the apocalypse, the revealment, the second phase of Christ's coming is the revelation, the apocalypse, the revealment to the world. And that's when he comes with all his holy messengers. That's when the church is complete, his bride is complete, The resurrection of the sleeping saints begins when Christ returns. It continues throughout the harvest period, where the followers of Christ come out of Babylon, out of the false denominational systems that were once church-state sort of systems that were broken in pieces in 1914 and lost the church-state status and lost their control over the colonies. This Daniel 2 image we think has been breaking apart ever since. But let me ask this question. How can Jesus have returned? The general thinking is, well, we don't see him. What's the evidence? When Jesus returns, every eye will see him. It'll be clear, it'll be evident. How can you possibly think Jesus is already here? Well, let me ask some questions. How do we explain travel? That we've been to the moon, that we have trains, planes, automobiles. How do we explain communications, the telephone, cell phones? How do we explain the internet, blockchain technology that's coming out now? How do we explain Israel restored? What's causing all these things to happen now? I think most of us would agree they're happening because we're at the end of the age, but who or what's causing this? Is Satan causing it? I don't think Satan's causing the deliverance of Israel. In Daniel 12, which Anthony plans on talking about, we have the signs of Israel delivered, knowledge increase, travel increase, the great time of trouble, and finally the book of Daniel being unsealed. All these things have been fulfilled. All these things are signs of Michael standing up. And in Daniel, when someone stands up, it's talking about a king standing up. If you look in Daniel 11, in the context, so Michael, who is as God, who is still Jesus' chief messenger, stands up, and Jesus is causing all these things to happen. If God is causing Israel to be restored, and if God is bringing about these transitions that are disrupting Satan's empire, which he wants to keep the world in darkness, and the internet's not helping him with that, if these things are really being overruled by God, is it such a great leap to think that God is doing that through Jesus, that Jesus is the great general of Jehovah, the great commander, the great King of Kings that he's sending forth to accomplish all these things behind the scenes? In Revelation 14:14, we have Jesus described as being on a cloud with a crown on his head and a sickle in his hand. So the harvest is beginning, this great harvest. And the verse before that says, "Blessed are the dead that die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, says the Spirit, that they'll rest from their labors and their works will follow them." Their works, or your translation says deeds, will follow them. So once Jesus returns, and I think he did return over 100 years ago, the sleeping saints were raised first, and they've been with him. And during this harvest period, they're working with Jesus behind the scenes. And those of us that are working with Jesus in the flesh here, when our earthly course ends and we die, if we've been faithful, our works will follow and will continue on the other side of the veil. So I would ask, how can we explain what is the cause of Israel being delivered, Israel back in their land, knowledge and travel increase? If it's not the return Jesus bringing this about, what's the cause? We have Bible prophecies that affirm Jesus, even time prophecies. We have the time prophecies of Israel's double. There are 3 scriptures in the Old Testament that indicate to me that Israel would have a duplicate period of disfavor followed by, favor followed by a period of disfavor, which we think ended in 1878 when the first Jewish settlement was established, Petah Tikva. So you have 1845 years from the death of Jacob in 1813 BC to AD 33, when Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. That's 1845 years of God's favor to the nation of Israel. When Jacob died, God was dealing with Israel, the 12 tribes, 1845 years. Then add 1845 years of punishment or disfavor onto AD 33, and that brings you to 1878, when the first Jewish settlement, Petah Tikva, was established. Now, there's the extended double, which doubly confirms this time prophecy. If you add 1880 years instead of 1845 years, which brings you from 1813 BC to AD 68, that's when, as Jesus said, when the army surround Jerusalem, let him which is in Jerusalem flee to the mountains. Well, the Christians fled, and the Romans ultimately destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. So 1880 years brings you to 1880 years of total favor, even though it was phasing out from the time Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. Add 1880 years to AD 68, and that brings you to 1948, when Jesus became a nation. So this double confirmation in time prophecies, I think, well illustrates that we're in this time of the end, when Jesus is bringing back the Jews. And like in the Ezekiel 37, the parable of the dry bones coming together, showing Israel becoming a nation, we're not at that point where the breath of life is breathed into them, where they've received the Holy Spirit. And then you have the Adventists came out with the book, The Faith of Our Fathers, which documented the beliefs of the Reformers through the Dark Ages and the centuries, and they uniformly defined the papacy as the great Antichrist system, and the 1260 years, the times and a half, a day for a year, they placed that as happening during these dark ages, that the great Antichrist system was not the Catholic Jesuit idea, which was a counter-Reformation thought of a man rising up in the future for 3.5 years. But the Reformers understood that the papacy was that great Antichrist system, and that 1260 years of that papal dominion and punishing of the saints ended in 1799, when Napoleon took the Pope prisoner to France, and where he died. And after 1799, we're in this time of the end period where things start to happen, and all of a sudden Christians start thinking about Jesus' second coming.
All right, Peter, I'll just stop you right there. Before throwing it to Anthony, just to be clear, the parousia, which you regard as invisible, happened what year?
I believe Jesus returned in 1874. He's been here for almost 150 years.
And the first invisible resurrection of the saints, is that correct? Happened.
Yeah, happened shortly after he returned.
In 1878?
Yes, yep. And then,
okay.
So those that have been dying in the Lord, for example, my thought, Carlos, if you're one of those faithful, then you would join that group when you die.
Right.
And that this won't be revealed to the world until the apocalypse, when Jesus comes with all his holy messengers,
right,
which is phase 2.
Thank you. So, yep. So, Anthony, just to throw it back to you, the invisible parousia, 1874. The first resurrection, which is also invisible, in 1878. And just a further question, Peter, before I throw it to Anthony. So, ever since 1878, if you are part of the saints, the 144, is that correct?
144,000.
Right. So people who die after 1878, they go to heaven when they die. Is that correct?
Yeah, it says in Revelation 14, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord from henceforth. They'll rest from their labors and their works will follow them.
Okay. So although you believe in the sleep of the dead, is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
But
I
the
believe
saints do not sleep the sleep of death. The saints, if you are a saint, you will go as a disembodied spirit to heaven, or
no, you will. The saints will have spirit bodies.
okay,
You know,
you'll ascend as a spirit body to heaven if you're part of the saints.
Well, in Thessalonians 4:16, they meet the Lord in the air. So I think that the saints and their spirit bodies have a work to do.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Sorry.
That's
okay, Anthony, 10 or so minutes, please.
Yes, I'm somewhat familiar with that. I want to make some language points here. First of all, a definition of parousia in the Thayer's lexicon. Arrival, clearly presence is right, but arrival is the main point. I don't think Jesus can have arrived in 1878, because the arrival of Jesus is also the same as his epiphania. That's 2 Thessalonians 2:8. Jesus will destroy the Antichrist with the outshining, the epiphania of his parousia. That's one event. So what Antichrist, I would have to ask, did Jesus destroy at his coming in 1878? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Now, I didn't learn any of this, of course, in the Church of England.
1874.
1874?
And 1878 is the first resurrection.
That's right, 1874 to 8 in that area. I would first of all say that the epiphania of his parousia, which is in 2 Thessalonians, by which he kills the Antichrist, must be a public event. I don't know of any Antichrist who died in that year, and the epiphania is the same event as the parousia. My second point would be this. In the question of the disciples, what will be the sign of your parousia in Matthew 24 and the end of the age? That's the same thing. So once we say that the parousia happened in 1870, around that time, then we're saying that the end of the age happened. That's very strange to me, because in Matthew, we have the end of the age 5 times. And so we can locate the end of the age as the harvest, the time up to which the Great Commission will be done, the end of the age. The harvest is the end of the age. That's a fixed datum for me. I don't think that was 1870. But then I'm not working out of a day-year theory either, you see. And I didn't learn any of this one way or the other, by the way. I'm just trying to get to this in the years that I taught in the Bible college. I don't see any evidence that 42 months, for example, in Revelation 11 is more than 42 months. So I'm working on half the final heptad. So let's go to the heptads in Daniel 9. I want to know, first of all, in 926b, Daniel 9:26b, the evil guy there who makes a covenant for 7 years also comes to his end. I'm going to insist on the Hebrew here. I'm going to also say this, that unless you know your Hebrew and Greek a little bit, better than a little bit, unless you're able to read Keil and Delitzsch, for example, and interact with the language issues, it's very difficult, because you're at the mercy of translation, which is sometimes not right. So I'm translating Daniel 9:26b as his end, not its end, his end. Kitso means his end in that context. The end of the life of that person, that evil guy, and I'm taking that prince to be an evil person, not Jesus. It isn't Jesus who comes making a covenant for 7 years. It's an evil guy. This is a grammatical issue for me in the Hebrew. I did study Hebrew in Jerusalem, and I've talked to rabbis and so on. I'm at least familiar with that. If you're not, it's very difficult, because, again, you're at the mercy of a translator like Rotherham, who is wrong to say that parousia just means presence. That's misleading. Have you got the Thayer's lexicon there on parousia by any chance, Carlos?
Yeah, I just put it up, and there it is again. Can you see it?
That's Daniel 9:26. That'll do well. His end, fine. The NET Bible gets it right. It's a false, misleading translation to write its end. Grammatically, it doesn't work. I don't want to do the grammar of the Hebrew here, because that's not useful. But it's a fact that his end. So you've got the city and the sanctuary will be destroyed by the coming prince, and his end will come speedily. And he, then makes a covenant, he comes desolating on the wings of abominable things. So my question then would be, where and who is this abomination of desolation? We've got to put our stakes in somewhere, because Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he, here's another grammatical point that I insist on, Mark 13:14, a masculine pronoun there. Not it, he, where he. I want, first of all, what is Jesus talking about here? We'll get to that question and Peter's answer, I'm sure. When you see, I repeat, the abomination of desolation, quoted from Daniel 11, from Daniel 9, from Daniel 8 also, and also from Daniel 12, when you see that abomination of desolation, then you're to flee. And it's standing where he ought not to. So this is a single individual, exactly the man of sin of Paul, the man of sin who's going to be destroyed at the parousia. I want to know how that happened in the 1800s. And I want to know what this abomination of desolation is, because if we don't get this right on the map, we're going to be all over the place, I think.
Here's Thayer's, Anthony.
Here's the abomination. Okay, here's the Thayer's, thank you. Thayer's lexicon on parousia. It's a Strong's word as well. You're here showing what, Strong's or Thayer?
Thayer.
Right, presence or one coming. Of course, it's the presence of one coming, hence the coming arrival. I don't like the idea of an invisible coming. That makes no sense to me. How can the arrival of Jesus be other than a single event at which he kills the Antichrist? How can the arrival be something that goes on over a period of time? That makes no sense. We all know, I think, from such classics as Alexander Rees's Coming Advent of Christ, that parousia is a well-known word in the first century. It means certainly presence, but it means arrival of the emperor to inspect his troops. It's an event, it's a day, it's a spectacular time. It's not something that happens over a period of time. So I'm making language points here. This one too, in Matthew 24, back to that one. What will be the sign of your parousia and end of the age? That's the same thing. Again, slightly technical point, the non-repetition of the article in Greek there, and if you don't know this stuff, you have to be very cautious. But the non-repetition of the article shows that the parousia in Matthew 24:3 there, the question, is the same event as the end of the age. So let me make this point. The parousia is also the resurrection of the dead. Now here we have a key point. How do I know that? 1 Corinthians 15:23. Paul lays out the order of events of the resurrection. First, Jesus got resurrected. We all believe that. Then, next stage, the resurrection of the Christians at his parousia. So we have to be very careful. If we're going to talk about a parousia that's in the past, we're also talking about the resurrection of the dead that's in the past. And we then run the risk, I think, of the heresy that Paul named, of saying the resurrection has already happened. I don't like the idea of a sort of a floating resurrection. That's very strange. The parousia is a single event, and it's the same as the end of the age, which we haven't arrived at. So I'm asking a number of questions here. I first want to know what's meant by Daniel 9:26b, his end, and then the he, the pronouns follow on. He, the evil guy, makes a covenant with the many, forces a covenant, in fact, with the many, for one period of 7. That's 7 years for me. And then after that, the desolating figure, the Antichrist for me, comes to his end, and he is desolated at the end of that prophecy. Final point might be this then, and of course we're ranging on a whole lot of information here. What is meant for Peter in Daniel 12:11, from the time that the abomination of desolation is set up, that's the key stake point there, from the moment that the abomination is set up until the end of the vision, which is the resurrection, that final vision ends with the resurrection, Daniel 12:2. There'll be 1,290 days. It's a little bit more than 3.5 years. How are we going to work that as 1,290 years? That would mean we could predict the year of the second coming 1,290 years before it comes. I want to know, where did that 1,290 years begin on that scheme? I'm thinking, and again, I didn't learn this in the Church of England. I learned a different system in Armstrong, although I never preached it. I wasn't a preacher in those days. But I think that classical futurism, the early church fathers, who knew nothing about a day-year theory, by the way, the earliest church fathers, I think, got this right. They were pre-mills, and I think that Peter and I are pre-millenarian people together. That's something in common. We believe in the sleep of the dead. And the pre-mill early church fathers had what I would call classical premillennialism. They believed in the 1,000-year reign in the future, and Peter does too. I want to be sure, though, and I'll ask Peter to respond to this point. Revelation 12:5 says the rest of the dead did not live till the end of the 1,000 years. Are we clear on that one? Because I've heard some Jehovah's Witnesses, not that Peter is a Jehovah's Witness exactly, I've heard them say, well, that doesn't belong in the text. Well, it does. The millennium is quite clear. Only at the first resurrection, the parousia, the coming of Jesus in Revelation 19, that's when the resurrection occurs of the saints of all the ages. The rest of the dead did not come alive until the end of the 1,000 years. And my final point would be this. Peter, do you think of yourself as a member of the body of Christ, as a saint, as having the Holy Spirit or not? Are you born again or not? I'm not sure where we are in this discussion. I'll stop there.
Anthony, just to be clear, when for you, when does the parousia take place?
The parousia is future to us because we haven't yet seen the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to. We haven't seen him come to his end. It doesn't work for Titus, who did not come to his end. Doesn't work for John Giscala. It doesn't work for anybody. Nero committed suicide. None of those figures will work. Incidentally, the temple was not totally destroyed in 70 AD. As Josephus points out, there was a wall remaining. It's not entirely a fact that all of that happened. So for me, the abomination is future yet.
Okay. Peter?
And the second coming.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was typing as fast as I can, so I'll try to respond to each of Brother Anthony's questions. Probably not to his satisfaction, though. But I do want to mention that maybe the most important thing about Jesus' second presence is the purpose. And I think and hope that Brother Anthony and I agree that the purpose of Jesus' second presence is to destroy the evil systems, the evil Antichrist, and Satan's control as the God of this world, to put that to an end, and then to restore mankind, to bring about the times of restoration of all things spoken of by the mouth of all God's holy prophets. So, so if I'm way off, I think we're in agreement on really the main thing, which we're talking about a God of love, a wise God that wants to fulfill his desire is that all men will be saved. So Absolutely. The plan he's devised is the best possible plan to save as many people as possible without violating free will.
Yes, that's in common, absolutely.
Good. Okay, good.
Acts 3:21, we use it too. Heaven must retain him, Peter says, until the apokatastasis, the putting right of everything. Now, you think that's already happened? You don't think it's happened yet. The apokatastasis there, that event. Do you believe that to be past or future?
For the most part, future. But where we disagree, and where I disagree with most Christians, is you can read through verses in Revelation or Matthew 24 in 30 seconds. You could read through 5 verses and say, boy, this is going to happen fast. And my thought is, no, that's not necessarily the case. That could play out over several decades or several hundred years, depending on where you are in the Bible and what the context is. And a good example of that is in Ezekiel 26, the destruction of Tyre, 7 events taking nearly 2,000 years, 7 specific events. So when we read events in prophecy, we're not necessarily can conclude right off the bat whether these events are going to happen quickly or play over a long period of time. But getting to Anthony's questions, and I'll try to be brief
that's fine.
In each one.
Keep going.
What Antichrist did Jesus destroy in 1874? And this gets back to my thinking that things occur gradually, that's the way God devised the plan, and that the systems, the papacy, and the denominational church-state systems have been in process of destruction In 1914, when World War I came, that broke apart the old church-state union. And so the churches lost civil power and the ability to crown kings and the divine right of kings. And since then, their power and influence has been diminishing. We see with all this information coming out about the Catholic Church, with pedophiles and the priests' involvement with that. And we see with this new Pope, there are many sincere Catholics that are rebelling. They don't like this new Pope. And so there's all sorts of problems. So probably not a satisfactory answer for Brother Anthony, but that's my answer, that this is all a gradual process. And, what caused church-state rule to break apart and end? And I think it's because we're in this time of the end since 1799, and everything's changing.
Sorry, Peter. Anthony referenced Daniel 9:26, his end, which goes with Daniel 11:45. Do you have any?
Yeah, I'm going in order of the things you mentioned, and I'm sorry, I'm really trying to be brief. Let's see, the sign of the parousia in the end of the age, Daniel 12:11, from the abomination set up. He was asking, how do I interpret Daniel 12:11?
Yes.
Well, the mistake many people made was prophetic students was, having the general idea that the 1260 years applied sometime during the Dark Ages, but not quite landing on the right dates. And I think all three periods, 1260, 1290, 1335, all started in 539. That's when the papacy, Justinian gave the Pope civil authority, and he was able to exercise that in 539 AD when the Ostrogoths were defeated. So 1290 years brings you to 1829. And that was a period of time when this Adventist movement was really starting to formulate. They were really starting to understand more about the immortality of the soul's wrong, and the Trinity's wrong, and especially that this whole idea of the Mass, which replaces Jesus' ransom sacrifice, was an error. And so I think the abomination of desolation that was set up by the papacy was this Mass that replaced Jesus' second presence. And now you had to go to priests to receive justification and not directly to Jesus Christ. So I end that in 1829. The 1335 brings you to 1874 from Daniel 12. But trying to get through this quick, I don't want to dominate here. Revelation 20, the rest of the debt. Well, wait.
Yeah, the rest.
He wants me to talk about Daniel 9:26. Oh, yeah. I've never really, I admit, I've never really looked at the Hebrew for the word he. That's something I need to investigate. But I will say this, Anthony, when you look at a lot of other well-respected translations like the New American Standard, and I view Rotherham as the most technically accurate translation of the Old New Testament. That's my opinion. And neither of them say he. So when you have so many translators doing it that way, I have my doubts. But if you want to email me some information, I'd be glad to look at that.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's right at our site. We have Daniel 9:26b at our site, an article, full article on that. I would argue from Kyle and Delich, who are absolute top-notch in the Hebrew. And by the way, the NSV puts it in the margin, but Kitzel is obviously his end. So I don't understand then how the abomination can be the Mass. That's not a person. Back to Mark 13:14, will you concede the point that the masculine pronoun there is deliberate? When you see the abomination of desolation standing where he, He breaks the rules of grammar to tell you it's a person, not the mass. So I've got to find a personal Antichrist based on Mark 13:14, I think Daniel 9:26b. But I did warn, I do think that there are places for scribes. Jesus said, I'll send them scribes, if that happens to be your lot. Many in the public are not well equipped to do some of this material. I don't say that in any snobbish sense. We all do something. We do what we can with the skills we have. But I don't think that the public generally has very good tools, books even to read. They've just got a Strong's Concordance and go at it. That has its point. I understand that, but I'm appealing to some very obvious language points that all the scholars get right. Mark 13:14. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to, please read all the standard commentaries there. It's just a fact that that's a he. And I also think that 1 John 2:18, when you've heard that Antichrist is coming, that's a proper noun. He didn't say it was wrong. They all knew, Jews knew about a final Antichrist, a final man of sin. What I'm afraid we might be doing is pulling everything into long periods of time, which destroys the moment and the twinkling of an eye at the resurrection. How come the resurrection seems to have been going on for a long time when Paul spoke of our resurrection to immortality as happening in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye at the parousia? The whole concept of an extended parousia is very difficult for futurists, obviously.
Anthony, Peter also had, while you're speaking, and then I'll throw it to Peter, a couple other questions. So he says, can you explain how Israel has been delivered back in the land, quote unquote, as a sign that Jesus has already come invisibly? And also, how do we explain all the great technological advances, I guess, communication, travel, etc.?
Well, that's obviously happened. There's no question that knowledge has increased. Nobody doubts that. That's perfectly obvious. However, I don't think that Israel coming back into the land is mainly what the Bible talks about at all. It certainly talks about them coming back into the land as converted. Jeremiah 50, a time when there will be no sin in Israel. So the mistake that's made by, I think, many in the preacher rapture camp, by the way, is that they say, look, 1948, Israel came back to the land. That makes the prophecies susceptible of future fulfillment, absolutely. So there is a point in that. But they're not there in faith. Zionism is a mistake because it says that virtue of the kingdom of God is there without the Messiah. Even the rabbis don't like that. So I would simply say that the prophecies of the restoration of Israel, which are massive, and we believe, as do the Bible students, that there is a restoration of Israel, are not really fulfilled, properly speaking, until Israel is converted, and that hasn't happened. It's a very pagan land. I'm glad they're back there, but they are not the Israel spoken of in much prophecy as the Israel converted and returning to God. And the 10 tribes have not returned to the 2. The 2 and the 10 are not together in the land. Now, all that's future. And where's the throne of David in all this? The Lord God is going to give Jesus the throne of David, and he'll rule over the people of Israel forever. I don't see that having happened. I'm throwing out these questions.
Right.
And the other question for Peter would be this: what about Acts 1:6? After a 6-week seminar on the kingdom of God, they finally asked the question that Calvin didn't understand at all. Calvin got mad at this question, wrongly, because Calvin didn't understand the kingdom. The question was a valid one. Is this the time now for you to restore the kingdom to Israel? He says, not for you to know the times. The fact is not in doubt. Now, I want to know then, when will or was the kingdom restored to Israel? That's critically important. I would say at the resurrection, which is a single moment, twinkling of an eye moment. An extended resurrection of dead is incredible to me, because it's at one single event that the man of sin is destroyed in 2 Thessalonians 2. One mighty event, I would think.
So, Peter,
you can see the two systems at war here, if you like.
So, Peter,
that's why we're doing this discussion. Yeah.
Israel delivered back in the land. Anthony says, yes, but as converted people of God. I think there are a lot of studies that say present Israel is one of the most secular nations in the world. and they're always at war. You know, they're always getting bombed and always horrific things by the Arab populations there. So that's the question, the answer to the question about deliverance. And would you agree that the Old Testament prophecies extending to the New regarding the people of God being delivered back in the land include the restoration of belief in Yahweh as the God of all of Israel? Or how are you defining, in other words, deliverance? They have, you said they have been delivered, they're back in the land. I think that's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a process. I don't think Israel's converted, but I think as you look at scriptures, and I have dozens of scriptures here under the topic of Israel on the Friends of JW's website. But I think when Israel is brought back to the land, they're not brought back in faith. This is something that's attained to later, and that's why there's prophecies where God says that, I'll purge out the rebels among you. But he says in Amos that you'll be restored to the land and you'll never be plucked up out of it again. So that was a promise that we think we're in process of seeing the fulfillment. And at this point, there's nothing that's going to pluck Israel up from out of the land. Let's see, conversion, let's see. Gosh, there's these prophecies that talk about, well, I don't want to take time. I'll just say that, let's see, Zephaniah 3:11-13 and Isaiah 4:3-4, it talked about the rebels or the proud ones who won't enter the land, which I think, actually there, I think it's symbolic of the new covenant arrangement. Israel is finally delivered out of Jacob's trouble.
Yes, Jacob's trouble. Define that for us. Is that past or future for you? The time of Jacob's trouble.
Future, but it's Jeremiah 33:7 that Jacob's trouble is only mentioned once, that expression. So it's hard to make a real big deal out of it.
Well, it's a huge deal, isn't it? Because it's a unique day. There's nothing like it ever. And they're going to be delivered from it. So where are you placing on your chronological map the time of Jacob's trouble, which is in the Acharit HaYamim, in the final days when the nations are going to beat their swords into plowshares and so on? Is this future or past for you, the time of Jacob's trouble?
I would put that future.
Okay, good. That's good agreement. Then let me ask you this, Peter. When is the Great Tribulation? There's only one of them. You cannot have more than one unique time of trouble. There's never anything like it, never will be. That's unique, once only. When in your chronological map, or where in your chronological map, are you placing the Great Tribulation? I don't mean just tribulation in general. We all know we go through tribulation. I'm talking about what's called the Great Tribulation, a time of trouble unprecedented. When is that? Future?
Are you talking about
Matthew 24:21.
Matthew 24:21, and
which
also,
is, of course, alluding to and citing, as you know, Daniel 12:1.
Yeah.
That's Jesus' reference. But I want to know, when is this? This is a fixed datum, it seems to me. When is the Great Tribulation? Future or past?
I think that I actually see a double application in when you look at the Lord's great prophecy in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. Luke 21's emphasizing the first advent and the destruction of Jerusalem, whereas Matthew 24 is placing emphasis on what that represents. Let him who is in Judea flee to the mountains. In Matthew 24, I think that has the second application, which is those that are in these false systems of denominational churches come out, which correlates with come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her plague. So where it says, pray that your flight be not in the winter or in the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation. I see that. I see a future application there.
That's Daniel 12, verse 1. So you're agreeing that Daniel 12, verse 1 is the Great Tribulation alluded to in Matthew 24, 21. We're agreeing on that then. Although you said a double fulfillment somehow, I'm not sure if we need that. A unique time suggests to me a unique time. And Matthew 24, 21 cites Daniel 12, 1 as its base. As you know, Jesus is working out of Daniel. So that Great Tribulation is, I think we agree, future to both of us then.
No, in Daniel 12, where it talks about a great time of trouble, such as never once was since there was a nation.
Yes.
I think that you can look at this in a broad and a narrow sense. In other words, there's right now we're in the summertime of harvest that ends with the winter time of trouble. So I think, or great tribulation. So I think the end of the great time of trouble is this final great tribulation.
Future to us.
Future to us. But I think in Daniel 12, the great time of trouble is including all the worldwide trouble that we saw with the world wars, with tens of millions of people being killed in these wars, and the killing of the Jews in the concentration camps. And
Peter, if I could just add, one of the points Anthony is making, I think, is also that the sequence here, if you're looking at Daniel 12, it's all at that time. That time. So there's an immediacy. We understand that we have gone and we will probably go through many terrible wars and tribulations, but the prophecy is always very immediate in terms of on that day or at that time, or in Matthew 24, 29. I think Anthony's point is that Jesus says immediately after the unique tribulation, immediately
when
after.
When is that specifically? I mean, this is time specific in a way that is so clear. Immediately following that tribulation, Mark's version says, after that tribulation in those days. Surely that's quite specific, isn't it?
What verse are you on right now?
This is Mark 13 and Matthew 24.
Yeah.
The Great Tribulation sounds very time specific, as it does in Daniel 12, 1, because it says at that time.
You're talking about verse 29, immediately after the tribulation.
Of course, the equivalent in Mark is in those days, after that, not any, after that single time of Great Tribulation. Then we have cosmic signs and the parousia. That sounds exactly like Daniel 12, verse 1, 2, and 3. Because
I believe there's double applications here, but in what I believe there's an application that agrees with what you're referring to.
Okay.
That immediately after this winter time of trouble,
future to us,
and start future. I also see a second application to this, and I think the double application principle is established by the fact that Luke 21's focusing on the trouble at the end of the first advent and talking more literally, whereas Matthew 24 is focusing more on figurative language for the second advent time frame.
Figurative language, that would be the difference between us. You see, the parousia for me is not a figurative thing at all. It's a plain arrival in spectacular thing in which every eye sees him. We're dealing here with two completely different methods of going at the Bible from a language point of view. You talk about a double fulfillment there. I say that a unique time cannot be double. A unique time is one time. It's clearly there in Daniel 12, and you didn't mention at that time. Daniel 12:1, at that time. What is at that time? The verse before is the death of the final king of the north. So talk about the final king of the north in Daniel 11:45, who comes to his end in the land. It's not Antiochus, who didn't do that. Who is this person who comes to his end in the land? And at that time, Michael arises. That's the archangel Michael, clearly. And then it introduces a unique time. I think one has to be careful about simply extending and expanding everything. Figurative language is too vague for me. I want to know, what is this unique great tribulation? which Jesus said follows the abomination of desolation. So can we get back to that? Who is this abomination? Who is this abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to in a temple in Mark 13:14, which triggers the time of unique tribulation?
Right.
And then the resurrection immediately after that. You see how easy that is?
Well,
you might say
I understand
simplistic,
what
but
you're
it's
saying.
easy.
I think, and I'll answer that. I think you've sidestepped the challenge I asked at the beginning, where, you know, who's bringing about all these things like the increase in knowledge and travel, which Daniel talks about. He says knowledge and travel would be
I agree with all of that.
increase. And so,
I agree with all that.
so you believe that's being fulfilled in our
Oh,
day?
absolutely, I do. But I don't think the abomination of desolation has stood in a temple, triggering the unique one only time, as Daniel 12:1. I don't think it's happened. That's not 2,000 years. It's a time in which pregnant women are in great trouble.
But you're putting Daniel 12,
Yes.
this time when Michael stands up and
Yes.
knowledge and travel are increased, you're putting that in the present time.
No, the great tribulation for me is future, because I haven't yet seen the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to, i.e. in a temple, 2 Thessalonians 2, and putting the
But what
material
I'm
of Paul
saying is,
together.
you know, in Daniel 12, if knowledge and travel increase has been fulfilled.
Well, not the time of great tribulation, specifically verse 1. We know about the text which says that knowledge will increase. That's clear. But what I want to know is the timing of this unique great tribulation.
What else is clear is there's never been such a time of worldwide trouble as there has been since the world was made smaller by technology, and we have nuclear weapons, and we had Hiroshima, we had the Great World Wars, we had the Great Depression. So I think we're living at the time. I think the time of the end, the King of the North was Napoleon, and he took the Pope prisoner to France. That ended the 1260 days, which brings us to the time of the end, which is a period of time that's hundreds of years long.
Yes, and I see that. You see that. I want our audience to see there's two completely different mathematical methods going here, and we can't both be right. We have to listen to each other, and this is what we do this for. But you know, in 1145, it says the final king of the north comes to his end. Who is that? Napoleon?
Yeah.
He's the king of the north?
I think so.
I would have thought the king of the north is clearly a Syrian kingdom, isn't it? Daniel 8, the fourth kingdom is Syria, not Rome. I don't think Rome is there at all, incidentally. So we've got a different scheme. But I want to know, what does at that time mean in 12:1, Peter? At that time,
at the time of the end, at the time of the end, which
is Napoleon's death for you,
which the time of the end begins in after 1799. So
at that time, specifically, what is at that time?
We are in the time of the end. We've been there since 1799, and where it says the harvest is the end of the age, you know. I think in order to understand the whole concept of the Matthew 13 harvest, you have to understand Jesus was talking about a harvest in his days of the wheat and the chaff. And so you had a 40-year period of time. The chaff was burned with unquenchable fire, showing the nation of Israel destroyed. Jesus was a chief reaper. His disciples were under reapers or angels going out preaching the message. You had a 40-year period of time. And I think we had a 40-year period of time from 1874 to 1914, where you had this come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her plague, that this major harvest was going on. And sadly, history gets written by the victors, and since the papacy and the systems have control of the history books.
Can I interrupt here a second? Sure. So this is now Matthew 13, just for our audience, because we might be going too fast. Let me read a bit of this. So he explains the weeds in the field. He who sows good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed, the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. The enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the
age,
and the harvesters are angels. Just as weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age, so twice. The Son of Man will send his angels. They will collect out of his kingdom all who cause others to sin and all evildoers. They, the angels, will throw them into the fiery furnace where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. That sounds a lot like Daniel 12. So Peter, just to be clear, and now we're entering the end of the age part. So the end of the age to you is what, Peter?
Well, the harvest is the end of the age.
Right.
When is that?
When did that occur?
In 1874, I believe it began.
Okay, with the parousia. So you have it with the
Yeah.
parousia, end of the age.
And the resurrection, the parousia is inextricably bound up with the resurrection. I must insist on that. Once you say the parousia happened in 1870 or so, you're saying the resurrection began then. You're saying the end of the age began, but in the text that was just read, Peter, it talks about the burning up of the wicked. You don't believe that happened already? Or do you?
Well, the tears are being bound in bundles for burning.
They are now?
Yeah, I think they have been. I think as truth is proclaimed,
It says they will throw them into the fiery furnace at that time. In 42.
Yes.
Again, there's a sequence of events that happen all at this time, Peter. I think that's the point. Is that right, Anton?
Well, I'm wondering, what does that mean to you? I would have thought the lake of fire is something that begins at the second coming, future. But you see, the whole system is different here. It's good that we define our differences. This is what is helpful to the audience. I'm not working on processes. I'm talking about events, like the end of the age is the harvest, which is future for Jesus here. He actually alludes to Daniel 12, verse 3 there. Well, you know that. When he says that the righteous will shine. Let me ask you this. Which of the righteous is now shining like the stars in heaven? You would say deceased true believers are now shining. They're resurrected and so on. You would say it's happened already, I believe, in your system. Is happening.
No. I see a process here, and just like in Jesus was the chief reaper at his first advent, and there was a harvest going on then that took 40 years, and there was residual work after that. I think there's a process going here. Once the church is complete, once the bride of Christ is fully beyond the veil, I think they'll shine as the brightness. But I think
some are not doing that now, though, Peter, right? Some are already shining in your scheme.
Yeah, the first resurrection.
I don't think that's really I see a process playing out over time.
Okay.
I think I have to give that some thought. I'm inclined to think that part of it's future. But one of the things that I think is really important here, we've been talking about Daniel so much. In the 12th chapter, it says the book sealed till the time of the end.
Yes.
So if you believe you understand the book of Daniel today, wouldn't that mean you agree that we're now in the time of the end? And
I'm perfectly prepared to believe that. I don't know how long that will last, but I do believe that knowledge has increased. I agree with you that we're in the time of the end. The end of the age, however, is a fixed point in Jesus. It's not the harvest that he was reaping when he was here. It's the end of the age because it's the Great Commission, the end of the age. It's when the righteous shine like the sun in its strength, and they're resurrected people. What I do find difficult is the idea that the resurrection, which happens in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, I don't think it's a process.
Peter,
well, as each one dies, it is in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. But
Peter, 12:13 there on the screen.
Okay.
Did that happen in 1874? So Daniel is told to rest in death, to sleep in death, until he rises again for his inheritance at the end of the age. Is that part of the 1874 scheme or 1878, the first resurrection?
No, I don't believe anyone before. Everyone up until John the Baptist, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that this Jesus opened up a new and living way. and I believe they're coming back on earth as the princes and rulers over it, the nation of Israel.
Oh, I
Right.
see that they're not part of the 144, the Old
No.
Testament figures.
No, Jesus opened up a new and living way.
So Daniel's
it's-
still dead in the ground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he's not right.
Got it.
He's unconscious. He's in the death sleep.
I agree on that.
But I guess my question on Daniel is, if you believe you understand
Yes.
Daniel, there's a lot of people with different interpretations of Daniel. It says the book would be unsealed.
Mm-hmm.
If it's unsealed, it means it's understood. Who, how, where, and when was it unsealed, and is it understood? And I think Jesus answers that in Luke 12, and it's unsealed at the end of the 1335 days, which was in 1874. But what's your thought?
Well, the last chapter of Daniel is critical for me because he's discussing in a debriefing the meaning of that last chapter, the last vision. And he asks a question. He says, how long will it be until these wonderful things happen? And then he follows that up with another question. What will be the final phase, the acharit in Hebrew? What is the final phase of all these wonderful things? Well, the wonderful things in that vision end with, guess what? The resurrection of the dead, following the Great Tribulation, preceded by the abomination of desolation, which you said was the Mass. I just cannot understand that, because I do think the abomination of desolation is a single person who comes to his end. So I'm working out of those bases. But that trigger of the Great Tribulation, which is unique, you're talking about a double fulfillment, it's a unique time, and it ends with the resurrection of the dead. And that's exactly the question at the end of Daniel 12, in verses 6 and 8. He first says, when will these things come to be? And then following up, what will be the final stage, the last stage? He doesn't say how long will it be till they start, because nobody knows that. I don't think you do. But he wants to know, how does this vision finally have its issue, its acharit, its final phase? That's very clearly laid out. From the time that the abomination, which is a person, is set up, and the daily sacrifice is taken away, implying a temple, there'll be 1,290 days, a little bit more than 3.5 years for me. So we have two completely different maps going here. And that's all right. This is what this dialogue is for. It doesn't mean we can't agree on many things.
You're adopting the Counter-Reformation view when you're, I think, or something similar to it, when you're making the Antichrist a man, an individual, a he?
Oh, absolutely. Mark does in Mark 13:14. When you see the man of sin, the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, is a person standing where he. Paul has the same thing. The man of sin is a single individual, not a continuity. You can't destroy a continuity of popes.
I'm seeing translations where it's it, like, again, Rotherham and New American Standard.
No, they're wrong.
So,
they're just wrong. That's a grammatical point.
I'm
insisting on.
I'm willing to look at the evidence. I'm willing to look at the
good.
evidence.
Please look at all the commentaries, though. Just don't read Rotherham and assume Rotherham gets it right all the time. I'm not assuming that.
I understand that.
I'm talking about Greek specialists at Harvard, Yale, Oxford, and Cambridge. That doesn't mean that.
I can, with Daniel, the book being unsealed, I can say that Jesus explained in Luke 12 who, what, when, where, and how. Yeah. And I can bring the revealment of Daniel and how it was explained, tie it directly with these harvest teachings and the studies of the scriptures that came out during this 40-year harvest period. So, I mean, can you identify some particular place, when, where, and how Daniel was revealed? Because I think Jesus is referring to the 1335 days when he says, blessed, wait, and come. He's picking up on the words of Daniel. Blessed are those who wait and come to the 1335 days.
Absolutely.
So he's
explaining. Your definitions of all of those terms are differing from mine. From the time
Jesus is saying that there'd be meat in due season given to his saints at that 1335, which started in 1874.
Yeah, that's a completely different map. What I'm trying to focus on here is let the audience understand this discussion. We are vastly differing. I've got a completely different system. I didn't learn this in Church of England. I certainly didn't learn it in Armstrong. This is the best that I can do, looking at all the facts, particularly listening to the great commentaries and at Harvard and Yale and Oxford and Cambridge. Those guys are not fools. They are not good believers. But when it comes to language technical things, Rotherham doesn't count. He's a good translator, no doubt. But I'm simply asking you to define the man of sin whom Jesus will kill at his parousia.
I
wanna
agree
know
with
who
the
that is.
reformers. I agree with the reformers that it was the great Antichrist system, and that Jesus'
sorry.
presence had a gradual destructive effect. Go ahead.
But it's not.
Sorry,
The
Peter,
Epiphania is a single event. The brightness of his
Right.
coming kills
I-
the Antichrist, I think.
Can I chip in here?
Yes.
Sure.
Just so you had a good back and forth, but I'm thinking always of the audience here, Peter.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's try and get a couple of simple yes and no things going here for the audience's sake. So just to be clear, Peter, the reference of Mark 13:14, the he there, let's take Anthony's word there, and our audience can by the way, don't believe anything anyone is saying. Check it out for yourself, hopefully.
Right.
But let's
Good.
take that for what Anthony is saying it is. Mark 13:14. Let's say it's a he. Jesus is talking about a person. And we know Paul talks about a man of lawlessness.
sin.
Okay.
Mhm.
But Peter, you just to be clear, you're saying that that's not a person, that's a system, correct?
The continuity
Yeah,
of persons.
lawlessness is a system.
Sir, say again.
Yes, I think the man of lawlessness is a system.
Right.
That Paul was referring to this system.
And
I
same
agree
with
with the reformers on that.
and same with Mark 13:14. If that's a he, that's also a system, correct? Not a person. Mark 13:14.
Let's see, Mark 13. Oh,
Anthony's
I'm in
point
Matthew.
about the
Yeah, if it's he, that's a problem for me. I have to think about that.
Sir, why is that a problem, not the man of lawlessness? How is a man different from a he? I don't understand. Why is that a bigger problem for you?
A problem for the reformers, and that idea was introduced by Jesuit priests.
Right. Why is the he of Mark denoting a person, right? All I'm trying to get for our audience here is why is that a bigger problem than a man of lawlessness?
I don't have an answer for Anthony's point on Mark 14. I'm not sure he's right.
Fair enough.
I have to look at it, and I'm not sure what I would do with it.
My point is, though, Peter, if the man of lawlessness is not a man, is a system, it's representative of a system. The he of Mark, whether it's a he or not, why would that also be a problem?
It might not. I'd have to give it some thought.
It's a fair response. He's saying, I hadn't come across that point. I'm going to look at it, which is ideal. That's
right.
Very good.
And quickly, and then I'll throw it to you, Anthony. Just to go back on something you said, Peter, on just to be clear here and not misunderstand. So the figure of the king of the north in Daniel 11, you believe that's a prophecy of Napoleon?
Well, over time, when it talks throughout the book of Daniel, when it talks about the king of the north or the king of the south, I think the players change as it marches through history.
How about in the section where it ends, Daniel 11, just before the Daniel 12 chapter?
Napoleon.
So this is Napoleon who died in the Middle East.
No, he didn't die in the Middle East.
Yeah, but this figure in 45,
but he did go to the Middle East. He went to the.
But this figure in Daniel,
this figure dies in the Middle East.
It says that he pitched his tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. I think we would agree that's between
Israel,
the Mediterranean, and the
Jerusalem.
Yeah, Jerusalem. And he shall come to his end with none to help him.
How is that true of Napoleon? That's the question.
Is that you? Is he still with us, Peter?
Yeah, I'm still.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
well,
connection problem.
Yeah, when Napoleon lost at Waterloo, he was put a prisoner on the island.
He died on the island of Elba, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
How is that fulfilled by that prophecy, though? I mean, many questions will put that to you. Fair enough. What's that to do with the land of Israel, where this king of the north, the final king of the north, comes to his end in Israel? That doesn't seem to be anything to do with...
Well, it doesn't say. It says he'll come to an end. It doesn't say he'll come to an end in...
It says he comes to his end. The Hebrew reads that way. You'll see it there. Every translation gets that right. Comes to Kitzo, his end. In the geographical specificity is clear there. How is that Napoleon dying or putting a palace up in Israel?
Where does it say he puts a palace up in Israel?
He pitches his royal tents.
They did literally pitch their tents in Egypt.
Napoleon in Israel?
Egypt.
No, it says between the seas. Where is geographics now, specifically? What is between the seas and the Holy Mountain? Where is that? Where? That's Israel.
Yeah, I think if again, don't believe us, but most commentators, I think, Peter, to be fair, do place that in the near Jerusalem, and furthermore. The reason I'm asking you is for clarity, because I hadn't heard that before, that the king of the north is Napoleon. Usually I think it's some kind of a Roman general or something of antiquity. So
Antiochus Epiphanes would be the scholar's unbelieving take on all of that, as you know. But that doesn't fit with the Great Tribulation, which is at that time. Whatever you specify the 45th verse to be, at that time we have the Great Tribulation, followed immediately by the resurrection, followed immediately by the shining of the saints' faces. Daniel 12, 1 to 3.
Yeah, so what do you take that king of the north to be?
He's a final Syrian king. If you look at the king of the north, as you said, he's, I don't know who that's going to be, but a Middle Eastern
future
ruler. Future to us, of course, because he comes to his end in the Middle East, and that's not true of Napoleon, it's not true of Titus, not true of John of Discala. 70 AD will not fit, and my nervousness here is that we're getting rid of the future, which we should be keeping an eye on, and putting it in the past. I don't think anybody has fulfilled 1145. That is the futurist point. One other point I must make, Peter, you're talking about the reformers.
Mount Tabor is between the seas, between the Mediterranean and the Sea of Galilee.
That's in Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but Napoleon didn't do that. Titus didn't do it. Who is this evil figure, the final king of the north? And you're right, the king of the north is various people in history, but he comes to a final one. The other point was, you talked about the Roman Catholics introducing futurism. That actually is false. We've got an article at my site, which George Ladd, who was a good friend of ours, tried to correct that wrong notion. It was not an error that those Jesuits brought in. They actually returned to original futurism. It's just wrong to say that they invented futurism. Futurism goes back to the earliest church fathers. I think that's common ground. Please look at our article on that at the site, George Ladd and many others. The slur has been, well, futurism, oh no, the Jesuits, they didn't. The Jesuits, in fact, recovered early church father stuff, sure, to get rid of the Pope. I'm sure they did it with that in mind, but they didn't invent futurism. Irenaeus, Victorinus, Commodianus, and so on, they all have the system that I'm now proposing, incidentally. Doesn't make it right. But what I do reject is a pre-tribulation rapture. And you would agree with that, right? There's not a double second.
Now to challenge something you said, Anthony. So this figure here, that let's stick with the king of the north here.
Yes.
So this figure to you dies in Israel, and immediately after, or at that time, this sequence of events occurs. So are you saying that the events of Daniel 11 regarding the king of the north are still future because you're connecting it to the resurrection chapter of 12?
That's futurism, the final Antichrist. If you're asking me that, of course, at that time, I haven't seen any final king of the north set up his tent, his palace, actually, an unusual word there, in Israel. I haven't seen that. Nor have I seen anybody making a covenant, an evil person making a covenant for one period of 7 years. That I expect to be future. I have no idea. It could be thousands of years.
What's
I don't
that?
think it is.
Daniel 9 now?
Daniel 9, he makes a covenant. Again, the grammar is very important. You must work through calendar leech in detail. He makes a covenant. That's not Jesus. Jesus didn't make a covenant for 7 years with anybody. And so we're talking about the 70th week here, which I think is future. So did all the early church pre-mill people as well. I'm a futurist of the classical type.
Okay.
That's all.
No, I haven't looked at this in a while, but I believe Napoleon did go into the Holy Land, but it's been a few years since I've really looked at 1811. So.
Okay.
I'm trying to find that
point.
information.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's move on to if you still got time here, Peter, Anthony.
We should close down pretty soon. We've been at it for an hour and 20 minutes, I think.
Okay.
That's good.
I'm willing to go on for 10 more years here.
Thank you, Peter.
It shows the chaos of Christianity. We're all restorationists. I'm simply wanting the public to hear this, say, come on, this cannot all be right.
By the way,
agree with Peter or Anthony, but you can't have both because they're systems in absolute conflict, actually, really.
By the way, Anthony referenced the earliest church fathers or scriptures. So you have a list here. The Didache places that in the future. Shepherd of Hermas. This is 1st, 2nd century.
Yeah.
Also, Justin Martyr talks about it in future events. Irenaeus.
Yeah. Well, it was future from them because the those were early church fathers. The man of sin and
for example,
go ahead.
Yeah,
didn't come about till the 6th century.
Right. Let's see. Well, I could just read.
And I mean, as with civil authority. That's when they actually.
Right.
Cyprian, in his epistles of Cyprian, 3rd century. Nor let any one of you, beloved brethren, be so terrified by the fear of future persecution or the coming of the threatening Antichrist, as not to be found armed for all things by the evangelical exhortations and precepts, and by the heavenly warnings. Antichrist is coming, but immediately the Lord follows to avenge our sufferings and our wounds. And other writers like Hippolytus plays Matthew 24, Luke 21 as something that still is yet to come. These things then being to come to pass, the 1 week being divided into 2 parts, the abomination of desolation being manifested then, and the 2 prophets forerunners of the Lord having finished their course, the whole world finally approaching the consummation or the end. What remains but the coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus from heaven, for whom we have looked in hope, who shall bring the conflagration or the war, just judgment upon all who have refused to believe on him. For the Lord says, and then he quotes Luke 21 and Matthew 24. So,
right. But if the book of Daniel sealed till the time of the end, these early church fathers would not have really fully understood how these prophecies.
Right. The point is for our viewers that the earliest church fathers did read the Olivet Discourse as future. And that's something to reckon with. Okay, we'll close it up, Peter. If you want to do a little closing here of your views or your disagreements, or what do you want our viewers to take away from this?
Well, I realize that the concept that Jesus has actually returned and been here for over 100 years to the average person would seem absurd. I recognize that. But I think it's because, we become indoctrinated from what we hear. There's programming that goes on in the churches where you get the same message. I guess what I would say is that we're in this time of a transition between ages where Jesus is doing a work right now. And I think Anthony might agree that God's doing a work right now that planes, trains, and automobiles just didn't come of their own just by chance. and that it's not Satan's aim to provide the internet. And by the way, blockchain technology, which I think is devastating to, as I understand it, to the governments of this world and the big banking systems that control everything, because blockchain technology and other disruptive technologies are interesting too, but blockchain technology is decentralized. So, and it's also strives to be immutable. So it tends to prevent fraud, and it's more efficient. It eliminates bureaucracy. They're talking about using the blockchain in voting in elections, which would eliminate fraud, because you could trace, anyone could go on the blockchain and trace every vote and verify every vote that was made. So I think Satan's in trouble. I think God's plan is moving forward. This light and information, many of mankind are using it for evil, no doubt. But I think this is part of Jesus, I believe, has returned. And he's using these tactics, these methods to destabilize Satan's kingdom. Even though Jesus could overturn Satan in a moment, it wouldn't take him a day to do it if he wanted to. That this is God's plan, how these things are going to play out. And when things play out over a long period of time, it really reveals men's hearts, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, what direction they're going to head, what choices they're going to make. But I think these evidences of Israel's double, 1,845 years taking us to 1878, Petah Tikva, the first Jewish settlement, 1880 years bringing us to 1948 when Jesus became a nation, is evidence of God's plan playing out. And when Jesus in Luke 12 said he was going to provide meat in due season, and he tied that in with watching, waiting, and coming, with those three words, which are words we find in Daniel 12, blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1335 days. That brings us to 1874, where all this meat and due season came, and the studies in the scriptures, the ransom for all, the times of restitution of all things, hell, Trinity is false, there's no immortal soul, but people sleep in death. All these things were brought to light at that time. I think that had a devastating impact on the denominational systems and people's faith in it. And revisionist historians have taken that out of history, but it was remarkable. The Brother Russell's articles were in all the newspapers, and his around the world. It exceeded all the other preachers combined. And the photodrama of creation was the beginning of, you could say, the beginning of Hollywood. But Brother Russell started it right. It was hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world saw God's plan in the photodrama of creation for the first time, moving picture and sound together. And we've lost sight of that, but that's what initiated the harvest coming out of the denominational systems. And I believe you guys and many others have benefited from the trickle effect of all this. I've spoken too much. I can keep going, so I'll just end it there.
All right, Peter. Just quickly, Peter, before you go, I have a question. The first resurrection has been happening since 1878.
Yeah,
and
I think so.
And ever since, whoever is a saint, an anointed of the 144, if they die, they go to heaven as spirit beings, correct?
That's my belief.
Right. Is a spirit being, what is the difference between a spirit being and the immortal soul doctrine, where Orthodoxy, as you know, Protestant Catholics believe that we have an immortal soul and we go to heaven or hell?
Yeah, one place where I differ from you guys is I believe immortality is only for Jehovah, Yahweh God, Jesus, and Jesus' body members, his bride, and that
The
the
144?
angels, the 144,000. And I believe that the rest of mankind and the angels all have everlasting life, or the opportunity from everlasting life. But I think in the Gospel of John, uh, God, explains God has life within himself, and he's given his son to have life within himself. That's what I understand immortality to be. We could have everlasting life, but we depend on oxygen, we depend on food.
Gotcha. So you have immortal spirit beings, part of the 144.
Yes.
What is the difference substantially or between them and the immortal soul that the Orthodox teach? You know what I mean?
Well, the difference is that you can't have consciousness without a body. So the immortal saints that are with Christ have immortal divine bodies, divine spirit bodies, is my point of view.
Oh, I see. So they have already attained the resurrection body. So they're not, because you said spirit beings, but they're really immortalized already in their bodies up there.
Yeah, I would spirit bodies, but I don't
I
believe
see.
a spirit body is material.
A spirit body is not material?
I do not believe. So would you
Okay.
guys define Jesus as having a material spirit body? To me, that's a contradiction of terms.
Anthony, you want to comment on that before you wrap it up?
I think Jesus indeed did. He said, I'm not a ghost, touch me. He had an immortalized body. He put on immortality at the moment of the resurrection. He had then ate and drank. So this is the reality of that for me. But I didn't get a clear answer from Peter. I want to know, Peter, now. You are not part of the 144,000, or are you? What is your destiny?
I hope to be. God will make that decision. I believe that in 1 Corinthians 3, there are many scriptures on this, but 1 Corinthians 3, 10 to 15 says, there are two groups that build their foundation in Christ. Those who build with gold, jewels, and precious stones, in other words, a Christ-like character, will receive their reward. And those with a foundation in Christ, I believe spirit begotten with the Holy Spirit, some build clumsily with wood, hay, and stubble. Their works will be burned up, but they'll be saved so as by fire. So
where are you, though? Where are you here? I want to know your psychology now.
I hope.
Are you born again? Are you born again or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Sure.
My terminology is begotten of the Holy Spirit. But
all right, but you are born again.
I believe so. Yes.
So you're part of the 144,000 in that system.
I hope to be part of the 144,000.
I hope to be part of it. That's rather vague. I want to know now, are you today already born again? And therefore, if you are part of the 144,000. That's fine. You have a right to claim.
That's God's decision. I believe there are millions running. I believe there are millions, tens, hundreds of millions that have been running for the prize of the high calling. And there's only a small number. Those millions will come back in the resurrection, and I believe on the spirit plane of existence.
Do you believe the Spirit of God lives in you?
Of course.
I believe the Holy Spirit of God lives in me. Yes, I believe when I gave my life to the Lord and was baptized, I received the Holy Spirit.
Is this one of the other differences between the Bible students and JWs? Because JWs, as Anthony, I think Anthony's point is that they don't believe they are. They don't see themselves as born again or spirit filled, if you would.
Or
they believe that time has passed for the most part, but they're sort of between a rock and a hard place, because they say, well, the bride of Christ or the church, the heavenly church class, the 144,000 is not complete yet. So there's still these residual members here, but it creates a major problem for them, because it creates a power structure problem. Because if there's a born again member in your kingdom hall, why the heck do the elders, the circuit overseers, and the district overseers have authority over them?
Right. Good
Right.
question. Okay, Anthony, you want to wrap it up here?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the value of this study, and Peter is very reasonable and very calm about all this. We've got two different systems here. If somebody says, I want to be a Christian, they might fairly say, what do you mean by that? Because we have completely conflicting ideas of the vast area of prophecy here. For me, a movable resurrection, a movable parousia, is a language impossibility. It simply is not what any good student of the language could imagine. Further to that, I think the single Antichrist is clearly there in the early church fathers and patently there in the New Testament. So to say that the parousia has happened in 18-something is to say the resurrection has happened. Paul condemns that as a dangerous heresy. I believe he does. It's simply nonsense to say that the parousia is a movable thing. It's not. The parousia and the end of the age are the same idea precisely. If the end of the age hasn't happened, then the parousia hasn't happened, and the resurrection hasn't happened. That's simplicity for me. The scheme is easier. My GPS is telling me very clearly which road to go on. In this other system, which was inherited from the reformers, by the way, a lot of it, I think uncritically, I don't blame them. We've all been very mistaken. My challenge to the Bible students and the day-year people, I think that's wrong. After all, Jonah was told it would be 30 days until, it's not 300 years or 30 years or something. I don't think that works. We've got an article on that. Many exegetes think the day-year theory doesn't work at all. However, that's a separate issue to some extent. But if you say the resurrection has already happened, then you're also saying you're ruling the world. Here's the fact we need to stress. When the resurrection happens at the parousia in the future, you, Christians, begin to rule the world with Jesus. You're not doing it. Therefore, the second coming has not happened. The parousia has not happened. The resurrection of the dead has not happened. It will. And when it happens, you're fixing the world. Paul condemned any idea that you're fixing the world now. You're not. What? I don't even have a place to put my head down, Jesus said. Paul said, I'm just making tents and so on. I'm not fixing the world. When the parousia happens, the single second coming, when the great tribulation, the future, only one, not doubling it, one unique time, when that happens, when the resurrection happens, then you're going to know, because Jesus will be back on the earth. I didn't hear much about the throne of David in Jerusalem. All of that has to happen. Acts 1:6, is this the time to restore the kingdom to Israel? That's the right question. That is exactly the right question. He hasn't restored the kingdom to Israel yet. The apostles are not sitting there in the kingdom with, supervising the 12. All of that is a vast vista of futurity for me that I don't think should be explained away by trying to put the future into the past. So that's my complaint with the system. But I do thank Peter for his very, very explicit description of it. It's very clear. Very clear.
Right. I must say, Peter, thank you once again for your time.
Absolutely.
And I must say, for the record and for our audience, everything you have heard, please do not believe anyone. No. Check it out for yourself. I tried to show you the references as fast as I could from both speakers who are very well learned, a lot of experience here, biblical studies. So, respect for both views, I say, but delve into them very seriously, meticulously, and most of all, prayerfully, of course. I commend Peter for his spirit, and I must say that Peter asked other elders of his association to talk to us, especially one who wrote the article on wisdom, Proverbs 8, which I was interested to have discuss his views. But I must say, Peter, that they refused for various reasons, which I'll keep private. I don't know if you want to talk about,
well,
but
still, I'm still working on it.
Well, thank you, but
one didn't want to do it.
I just wanted to say that reflects on you very well, because to me, you are a courageous individual with a very, very gentle spirit, and I commend you. And I hope your fellow elders, because if they're elders, we're supposed to be out there teaching. So I think it's a responsibility upon us all. And we're an open door, as you are, Peter, and I commend you for being an open door, because truth has nothing to fear. And you are showing it here. You believe in your truth. And I commend you for your courage, your patience, and hopefully we can both learn from this exchange.
actually.
Okay, so once again,
Thank you.
Peter Karavas,
Mhm.
that's his website there, Friends of Jehovah's
Yeah.
Witnesses. If you want to check out his references there, and here on the left, they have a lot of articles.
Mhm.
So please look into that, and like I said, just research for yourself. As Sebastian Castellio said, conviction is free, or should be free. Biblical studies should be a free thing. And this is our website, Anthony, Sir Anthony Restoration Fellowship. And you can go to the article section, and we have it all laid out there, the gospel of the kingdom. And today's talk on really prophecy. So that's what we'll call this,
Yep.
a discussion on prophecy. Thanks again, Peter. Thanks again, everyone. And we hope to see you down the road.